I think we are live now on Facebook as well. So greetings everyone, and we are quite excited to continue with these sessions that we've been having. And today we have Janet Cherry and Patrick Benham, and on a very important topic, as you can see. We have been trying to broaden the discussion around broader macroeconomic policy framework. We looked at monetary, fiscal. Last week we had quite a very insightful discussion around universal basic income guarantee. And today we have also a really a very important topic, which is building decentralized production from below. And essentially, Jenny and Patrick, they are gonna present to us their work around what are inclusive and what are participatory economic alternatives and models that essentially expand economic participation from generally a narrow framework of economic system in which essentially only those the elites are actually participating, and then the rest of us essentially have to piggyback on it. And so this is quite an important subject, especially in the kinds of discussions and the kinds of struggles that are unfolding in the country. I mean, obviously the crisis of COVID, but the crisis within our economy, the crisis of our transition, the crisis of our democracy, the crisis of mass swathes of our people that are continually feeling excluded from the economy, from society, excluded from the dream that that many of us struggled for, which is non-racial, non-sexist, free, prosperous South Africa for all, you know. And so this subject really around expanding, decentralizing the economy, but also building an intentionally inclusive economic system, it's a key one. And so even our discussions around monetary policy, fiscal, so how the fiscal policy plays itself out, but also even the discussion we had last week around UBI, you know, and so it's not just framed as a welfare, only just using the welfare frame, but it's very much as well influenced. It must find articulation essentially with how do we build a different economic system that empowers a larger scope of people, that ensures that South Africans have ownership in the townships, in the rural communities, wherever they are, they have a sense of ownership of the economic system, and that it actually changes their lives and the lives of their generations. And so we are looking forward to quite an insightful and probably engaging discussion with one another. And so we are quite happy to welcome Janet and Patrick. And so we will give over to them right ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon, comrades, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Comrades Tembiso, I think, you know, it's quite a fortuitous time to be presenting this model and showing how we're trying to pilot a new economic system at a very local level. So we all know the context of the economic crisis, the COVID crisis. And I just heard this morning on the radio talk about recapitalizing the economy. And you will remember the talk of the 500 billion Rand recovery package. And a lot of talk about infrastructure spend as being the driver of economic growth and how we need to do this immediately. So we're asking a question, which is spend on what and recapitalization how? Like, what are we really talking about here? And Comrade Jeremy Cronin talked on Sunday at the Jack Simons Party School about what is the alternative to an austerity response. And this, of course, includes things like the basic income grant and measures which are designed to stimulate the economy, which are more, we could say, more demand-driven or designed more on working class consumption rather than welfare measures. We also heard this morning on the SAFM, I heard one of the critics of the government talking about the DTI as introducing socialist policies and saying we need to move away from centralized state-led policies. So really what we're looking at here is alternatives which are based on certain principles of decentralization and socialization of production. And we also referred to localization. And also just let me refer, we had a seminar at the university yesterday, which Garth Strachan led, and he, as you know, was playing a leading role as head of industrial development in the DTI. And he talked about localization in the sense of building and protecting our local, as in national, manufacturing industry. And the problem in South Africa that at the moment we, protective equipment like masks or simple things like school desks, we are importing because we actually simply don't have the industrial capacity to manufacture things that we need to consume. And we fully support his argument, which is that we need to develop our national manufacturing capacity or redevelop it, can I say, after quite a prolonged process of deindustrialization. But what we're talking about is a more local level of localization. So really, really local localization, which is decentralization of production to neighborhood level in working class communities. The other term that we are using is transition. And this project is called the Transition Township Project. So the question is, what is a transition and how do we understand the concept of a transition? And this is what I'm going to briefly introduce you to, and then I'll let Patrick actually explain the pilot and how we've piloted this model in practice. So this is what we call action research in the university, participatory action research, which is where you test out an idea or a theory by actually implementing it and seeing what the results are and whether they can be replicated and how they function, how it works in practice. So it's a radical pedagogy, a radical scholarship, and it's very good that we have a university which allows us to have the freedom to do this. The project itself was started as funded by the NIHSS as what they call a catalytic research project. And catalytic, as you know, means it can catalyze other things, can be a catalyst for other developments. So, okay, this is the Transition Township Project. It started 5 years ago in Nelson Mandela Bay in the township of KwaZakhele, which you'll see on the slide. I think people can see the presentation with the newspaper article saying KwaZakhele takes the gap. And KwaZakhele, that article was published this morning, fortuitously. But we started doing this in KwaZakhele because it's a working class township. It's pretty uniform old working class township. It's got quite a good level of infrastructure. And one of my students, who was a comrade in NUMSA and in the party, KwaZakhele, some of you might know him. I know Pat Horn worked with him at one point. He was really the initial stimulus behind this project. And from my side, okay, so from Nko's side, he was, I think, responding to the idea of building working class power in our communities from about 10 years ago. I think Blade wrote a paper about that. Building solidarity economy, creating cooperatives, creating local people's committees around production of food and infrastructure, and so on. So he said he wants to just build one really functional, sustainable, worker-owned and managed cooperative. From my side, I was responding as a development academic and activist to the imperative of climate change, of responding to climate change as an eco-socialist, as I would self-define, and saying, we are looking at, this was actually after COP17 and the launch of the Million Climate Jobs campaign. And we were looking at how renewable energy is actually a potential for a just transition to an economy which is more democratic, more egalitarian, where working class people have access to economic power, as well as energy, as well as electric power. So really that was what was behind the thinking initially. And we had two premises really for this project. So the one premise is a contextual premise, which is that in South Africa, we have the democratic space created by our liberation movement, but it's not actually been used effectively by the left, and there are very few examples of viable cooperatives. We've had a process of deindustrialization where there's mass unemployment, but there are very few examples of workers taking over sites of infrastructure of deindustrialization, which have occurred over the past decades. So we've got in KwaZakhele assets like empty factories, abandoned school buildings, a decommissioned power station, quite a lot of land, in fact, and infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, sewage infrastructure, and so on. But it's not used for productive purposes. So the second sort of set of premises in our model and in our argument are premised in Marxist theory, really. And the first premise is that technology is a liberating force. And Patrick will talk a bit more to this. Secondly, that the new technology enables decentralization and localization and socialization of the means of production. And this is also something which we will illustrate through the example that we give. Thirdly, we argue production in South Africa. It is possible to change social relations of production in certain ways. And that allows, using this technology, it actually allows for ordinary working class people to take control over production. So, yeah, so let's see how this works in practice. We've got the democratic space to test this and test it in a working class township. This is our project. The project is called Transition Township, and it refers to two transitions. So the first transition is the just transition to a fossil-free production system, if you like, or a fossil-free economy. And seriously, you know, I think we have to be very blind to deny that this is happening. This is the way we have to go in South Africa as well as around the world. We have a potential to do this. I mean, we are very coal dependent as an economy, but it's absolutely imperative that we undergo this transition to renewable energy. So not to get bogged down in the debate here about the resistances to that from within organized labor, from within the coal industry and vested interests and so on. We don't want to get bogged down in that. We want to test the alternative in practice. The current regulatory framework has not been sympathetic to this, but we found a gap which we are taking. So as you see from the newspaper article, we're taking that gap. And so I'm going to let Patrick talk to the PowerPoint and basically present this argument. So yeah, let me come back at the end to make some concluding remarks, but I'll let Patrick present it, and you can judge for yourself, see what you think. if you think this is a viable model or not. Thanks, Pat. You can go ahead.
So thanks, Comrade Janet, and good afternoon to everybody else. I thought I'd start off by just giving you guys some quotes to get our minds thinking, and going right the way back in history to Aristotle is the first one. So I'll just read it to you. There is only one condition in which we can imagine managers not needing subordinates and masters not needing slaves. This condition would be that each instrument could do its own work, at the word of command or by intelligent anticipation, like the statues of Daedalus or the tripits of Hephaestus, of which Homer relates that of their own motion they entered the conclave of gods on Olympus, as if a shuttle would weave of itself and a plectrum should do its own harp playing. The second one is from Karl Marx. In a communist society where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow. To hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. And then the third one is from Warren Buffett, famous billionaire. If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work till you die. Okay. So, in thinking about the theory of where we are, we went back to a Russian Soviet economist by the name of Nikolai Kondrativ, who came up with the notion of what are now known as, even in amongst the market analysts, as K-waves or Kondrativ cycles, each of which lasted between 50 and 70 years, and going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in around about 1770, coincide with the take-up and the rollout and the eventual the extension of particular technologies through the capitalist order. And so we're moving through the sixth version of this cycle. It's the cycle that includes artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and others. So these cycles also coincide with, when the cycle changes, according to Kondrativ, coincides with periods of deep crisis. And you can see a list here which goes back. The first one was the 7 Years' War of the 1700s. The First and Second World Wars, and etc. And clearly we are living through something similar to previous periods of crisis, as many commentators have actually pointed out. But I just want to draw your attention to something that Kondrativ points, or Kondrativ himself says. During the recession of the long waves, an especially large number of important discoveries and inventions in the technique of production and communication are made, which, however, are usually applied on a large scale only at the beginning of the next long upswing. Okay. And this is just a diagram showing the size of what's called the data sphere, in other words, the number of bits and bytes available for the digital economy, and we are on some kind of exponential curve, which according to this says we will have 175 trillion gigabytes available for the digital economy by 2025, which is not far from now. And you can see that curve from 2010, there were almost no trillion gigabytes, but it's not much smaller number, something like 20 trillion. Okay. So the last quotes for a while. So the first one is from Yanis Varoufakis. With consumption and production hit massively in at once, governments were forced to step into the void, to replace all incomes to a gargantuan extent at a time the real capitalist economy has the least capacity to generate real wealth. The decoupling of financial markets from the real economy is a sure sign that something we may defensively label post-capitalism is already underway. That's from Jonas Varoufakis coming from the left. And this is from a market analyst by the name of John Maudlin, who's describing how they see it at the moment and talking about what's going to happen next.
Patrick, are you stuck?
May help if Patrick closes his video. Sometimes we lose the audio.
And you're in the middle of this great, what do you Hello?
Hi.
Okay, yeah.
For a moment. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Guys, I think I lost you for a moment. Can you just...
Yes, yes, we
Yeah.
can.
And I think you need to share the screen again, Patrick.
There you go.
Yeah. There's intermittent connectivity throughout the city at the moment. So
Sorry
hopefully that
about
won't happen again. But... Okay, so Maudlin talks about the Great Reset, and what that involves is what it is going to involve in some degree is the application of new production and communication technologies, similar to what Kontadiev predicts. Decentralized production, the relocalization of supply chains in several industries. And we're asking a question, can it also mean the mass ownership of productive assets? So another way of asking that question would be, what could a progressive 21st century alternative look like, and can we build it in South Africa? And in thinking about this, we are saying that it needs to be democratic, participatory, inclusive. We don't want to leave anyone behind. We want to be decentralized so we can solve problems where they occur. We want to mobilize the resources of the entire nation. We want to deploy the existing capability and infrastructure of the state and civil society, solve the problems we face, improve and build neighborhoods fit for all our residents to live in, and then repurpose the existing brownfield industrial plant buildings and infrastructure to promote a circular economy which prioritizes local production. And the question then arises, who is going to own this sustainable means of production? Or put it another way, is it possible for the masses of the people to participate in the sustainable production as owners? Just another little circuit back to some theory here. What does Marx say about this kind of thing? And this is a quote from Capital, Volume 2. The formula for the circuit of money capital is money, commodity, production, commodity 1, money 1. The dots indicating that the process of circulation is interrupted, and that C1 and M1 designating C and M increased by surplus value. What does that mean? Well, one way of looking at it is this diagram here from David Harvey, where traditionally we have concerned ourselves with the state expenditure, wages, profits, rent, interest, reproduction of labor power. Last sort of 30, 40, 50 years, we've been concerned about those things. But in fact, we should be concerned about money capital, production, what's in red there, realization of value, and commodities themselves. So I'm not going to go into the detail of this diagram. People can discuss it afterwards if they want to. But just to simplify it slightly, so what do we mean when we're talking about production? So we're talking about taking a resource, putting it through some kind of production process, and generating some kind of commodity. So in the case of renewable energy, it will be taking the resource, which is the sun, the wind, labor, some capital, some land, putting up some sort of community-owned renewable energy installation, and the commodity we're going to produce is electricity, which is measured in kilowatt hours. Similarly, with food production in urban farming, we're going to take some water, some seeds, some labor, some capital, some land, create some sort of urban food garden, and produce fresh vegetables. And again, with household waste, we're going to take some labor, a bit of capital, put up some sort of collection point, and we're going to generate some sort of raw waste as a commodity, which can be sold. And so the place we're going to be doing this would be KwaZakhele, a township of around about 25,000 households, roughly 120,000 people, quite well developed. Can people see my the cursor as I move it across the screen here?
Yes.
With my cursor, I'm showing you the main sort of industrial and commercial sort of corridors that run through the area. Over here is the old Swartkops power station, which is a brownfield industrial site that's currently being used for manganese storage. This is a wetland that is also, to some degree, polluted by some of this brownfield industrial activity. So yeah, that's KwaZakhele. It's got a highly skilled workforce, but 50% unemployment, and quite a high proportion of formal housing and service delivery, electrification, etc. So the aims of the project were to mobilize citizens to participate in the development of the area, revive the economy, create sustainable livelihoods, asset-based economic development, food sovereignty, participation in the climate jobs campaign, promotion of the circular economy, and quite important, appropriate use of technology, things like solar PV, hydroponics, whatever other technology is available. So what do we find as a result of this research? So our research shows that with a potential investment of around about $1.5 million, in this case spread over about 25 households, or combined with 25 households, generates approximately 600,000 per annum in revenue, with 24,000 rand per household over a period of 25 years. A portion of this amount will be used to cover the marginal cost to run and maintain the installation, and a surplus gets distributed to each participating household. So, average household income in the area is around about 30,000. So once you pay back the cost of the machine of the installation, you're raising the average household income by almost 2/3. And that is a dividend. It's not based on employment. It's based on ownership of the means of production. And we'll get back to that in a minute. So what we're saying here is that the technologies can be used to improve productivity, and therefore the amount of commodities that are produced. And you'll see what we mean. This is just a conceptualization of it. I won't go into the detail of these slides, but I will make them available. Basically, the university, in combination with the city and funders, sets up some kind of NPO which assists the cooperative structure to produce energy, food, waste, and water. Production occurs at the street level, or what are known as gap taps, which are these open spaces in the township that used to be for water stands. So that was the original concept. It kind of evolved into this, and again, I won't go into detail here, but essentially the production and operations occurs at the level of the gap tap itself. Okay, so what do we find? If you go back to that original idea of taking resource and putting it through a production process, 1,000 square meters of municipal land plus R1,000,000 gets your solar installation, which produces around about 150,000 kilowatt hours per annum, which at current prices is 280,000 rand. So that installation will produce that for 25 years, 280,000 per year. Similarly, with the water, compost seeds, and some equipment of around about 500,000, you can put in grow tunnels, a rainwater collection system, a dam to store the water, and you can generate around about 17 tons of vegetables, which at current market prices is another 260,000 rand. Same thing applies to household waste. So you're putting it through some sort of waste sorting process. That 25 households will produce around about 53 tons per annum, and again, we can place a value on that because we know what everything from plastic to glass is valued at. So that would be phase one. Phase two would involve things like taking it one step further, and your community garden produces fresh chilies. It goes through some sort of process in a community kitchen and produces chili sauce, let's say. Similarly, waste plastic can be processed in a community-owned extrusion plant and can produce plastic pellets. And then those plastic pellets themselves could be processed further in some kind of community-owned 3D printing plant to produce recycled plastic pellets. So how would this operate in the real world economy, if you want to call it that? The way we've conceptualized is that there are suppliers, neighborhood production systems, and some kind of market. So in this case, if you go look at the example of, let's say, energy, you've got people that are selling their labor that want to work on some kind of energy project. You've got people that are supplying machinery and equipment. You've got the asset of sunshine and wind and organic waste that's in the area already. You've got potential services from business services, energy management, all kinds of stuff that's available in the economy which we can use to support our production process. We thought about some kind of mercantile exchange where those suppliers can sell what they are trying to sell, whether it's everything from labor to machinery, to the community-owned renewable energy installation. And then there's a second exchange which occurs between the installation and the consumer of the electricity. And that can be households, local commerce and industry, citywide commerce and industry. And just to sort of think about, sorry, I'll get there, some of the numbers here. Each household would have a share in an installation that amounts to around about 4 kilowatts installed. But for the township as a whole, that would be 100 megawatts. And for Nelson Mandela Bay as a whole, that would be 1.5 gigawatts. And those numbers are going to be important when we come back to talk about the scale of the energy crisis that we are actually in. Because there's a potential solution that people can be involved in. So I won't get into the detail of the difference between installed capacity and production, but you will notice that there's an H on the end there, and that's to do with kilowatt or gigawatt or terawatt hours, which is the actual energy, it's the electricity itself, as opposed to the potential. Okay. So in terms of what that could look like in terms of fresh vegetables, our research, for example, shows that the market for fresh vegetables in KwaZakhele is around about 145 million, and that's at the moment being around about 30 million of that's obtained from roadside hawkers and vendors, 20 million from spaza shops and supermarkets, and about 95 million from the supermarket chains. the potential vegetable production for KwaZakhele is around about 260 million. So in other words, potentially KwaZakhele could produce more energy than vegetables than it's consuming. And a similar thing applies in energy. But again, suppliers of grow tunnels, Georgia tanks, water harvesting systems should be able to get sort of supply our production systems. And we can talk about what that means in terms of things like corporate power, in terms of the cooperatives having some buying power when it comes to purchasing some of this equipment. So this is just to show what's been going on since the lockdown. People, I'm sure, are aware that all over the country vegetable gardens are being put up. This is just what's happening in Nelson Mandela Bay townships, and the various different kinds of organization and installation. But all over the country, people are actually taking control of production by growing vegetables, which is a form of production. And when you think about how to improve that and how to fit those production sites of production or installations into value chains. So this is just to show you we're back to KwaZakhele, the aerial photograph. This is the area surrounding the power station, and already we've got a piggery up in this corner over here, a cattle kraal, this community vegetable garden. These are potentially the multiple gap tap production nodes. And what could happen to this piece of this installation, this brownfield installation, is it could be used to do green production, research, all kinds of things could happen in that. It's got plenty of infrastructure attached to it. There's a railway line. So could we do something with that? The answer is obviously yes, and especially if we had funding from national government to redevelop it, so from development finances. So what this looks like, again, at scale, Ward 22 has got the potential to generate a revenue of approximately 90 million rand per annum. KwaZakhele as a whole could generate 600 million per annum. And when you think about the fact that the current economy of the township is based mainly on household income, which is sitting at around about 800 million. So we can add a whole 600 million to that potentially. That's not surplus, that's revenue, but nevertheless, it's an economic value. And in theory, the same thing applies when you do this at scale in the country. So the current installed capacity of our energy production is around about 52,000 megawatts. The latest integrated resource plan says that this is going to rise to around about 77,000. If all 16 million households in the country participated in and had 4 kilowatt installed, each one of them, we would have 64,000 megawatts. In other words, 124% of the current installed capacity and 83% of the capacity planned for 2030. Now, obviously, we're not going to be doing every single household and probably not even half of them, but this just shows you what the potential is. I mean, people keep on saying we need that Eskom needs to have productive capacity or installed capacity. This is one way of generating that capacity. And so I wasn't going to leave the last word to Warren Buffett. The last word goes to Vladimir Lenin, and that is that communism is Soviet power plus electrification of the whole country. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So that gives you a very concrete idea of what we're looking at. I think if you go back, if you look at the very first slide, you'll see the first pilot that we have established, which is a neighborhood cooperative. And these are members of the cooperative. They are residents of that particular gap tap, and they own and manage this installation. So at the moment, there's a small PV solar installation and a vegetable tunnel garden, which is quite productive. Okay, so there's a whole lot of issues related to this pilot, which we can discuss in terms of the institutional arrangements with the municipality and how energy is bought and sold and so on. But I think in that respect, I mean, I think you all understand that the regulations and the legislation for municipalities to procure energy, to buy energy from local producers is changing at the moment. It's in the process of being amended so that it's easier for municipalities to buy electricity from local producers. The REAP program, as we know it, has been quite successful, but it does rely on it. You know, it's geared towards big investors, big capital, often external to the country, who are benefiting from this program. So we're saying, you know, if big capital can benefit from solar power, which is free energy from the sun, why can't working class people benefit from it and generate energy? So there's a straightforward argument, and it requires some institutional change for that to be effective. But we can test it in Nelson Mandela Bay because we have a municipal, we had the head of the electricity department who explored the feed-in tariff and how it could work. So we know this works very well in some other countries, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and so on, where there are household or rooftop solar, there are neighborhood cooperatives which control their own electricity supply and production, and so on. So it certainly can be done. I mean, we know that the problem is not with the technology. The problem is with the institutional arrangements. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say at the moment. So let's open it up for discussion. Stembiso, I think you're going to chair, eh?
Yes. Thank you very much, Jenny and Patrick, for this presentation. And yes, so maybe let's just start maybe and see if first there are any clarity questions, just most clarity questions before we actually open the full discussion. So if there are clarity issues, in fact, there was one question here raised by anonymous attendee, and the question is, what are the implications for skills development regarding this model? So that's just one question that has been asked by someone. I see Rasikan also has raised a hand, and so Rasikan.
Thanks very much, and thanks, comrades Janet and Patrick. A really excellent presentation. I want to suggest that it's not that I think the points that you've raised are very important for us all to engage with. I want to discourage a view that the technology is okay. It's just the institutions that need correction. The technology itself results from social engagement, and it's the lack of transformation at our institutions that are responsible for knowledge creation that makes us then become the purchasers and franchisers of technologies developed abroad. All of the points that you raise could and should have endogenous roots, because vesting a true productive capability implies that we know what it is that we are working with and we are utilizing them for our purposes itself. So it's really encouragement. There are quite a few quibbles, but those are technical, if you don't mind, with your periodization. I do know a little about this, seeing that I have a PhD in it, but I want to encourage you. The ICT revolution ended a long time ago. We are dealing with the aftermath of it. Something that started in 1971 burst at the dot-com boom. And so we're dealing with the subsequent to it. And I really want us to confront the fact that we are being forced into a narrower paradigm around smartness and technologies, which are even past their developmental stage. So I want to really encourage, we must fix the institutions, but I also want to suggest we also have to take technology back and gain control over the entire knowledge generation process, which should be endogenous as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rasikan. Comrades, can I see other hands as well? If there are hands, please just use the platform here. You can go to participants, and then on your name, you can just click where it says raise a hand.
There is Jenny. Jenny Schreiner. And there's Hashila Nasi, one of the attendees.
Okay.
So if you can give her or him
please come through, Jenny, and then Hashila. After her, I will just allow Hashila to be able to speak.
Thanks, Comrade Simbiso, and thanks to Comrade Janet and Comrade Patrick for a very interesting presentation. I have load shedding at the moment, and I have a generator, and my battery ran flat, so I missed a couple of sections of the presentation. So I apologize if I'm asking questions that were covered. I was concerned about the issues of how, Janet, your input at the beginning around localization fed into the issues around the technology. So perhaps I'm feeding into or am covered by the comments that Rasikan had made. But it's also against the background of the enormous challenges that we had with the beginning of the rollout of alternative energy technologies in South Africa, in which we landed up being completely dependent on foreign technology, and as a result, even the maintenance of the solar panels became a major problem. So how that is addressed, and then I think the other, which is particularly prompted by Patrick, your last slide, the governance issues.
Jenny?
Yeah, we lost you. We've just lost Jenny.
Yes, I think we lost Jenny. So let me just allow Heshila to talk. Please come, Heshila.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for an excellent presentation. So I just wanted to know if the study has examined the implications for skills development or for skills needs with this kind of intervention. Hello?
Yes, I think we heard.
Thank you very much. Let me just allow also Suzanne Grace, who typed also some questions.
Yeah, I see.
Suzanne? Suzanne?
I can see Suzanne's question there.
Oh, you can see it. Okay, great.
So should we respond to them?
I think yes.
All right. Let me, if Jenny comes back online, she can finish her contribution.
Exactly. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So Patrick can add to the skills issue, which two people raised, and I think the answer is yes, that there is enormous potential for this to be combined with some kind of skills program, and at various levels. So we're looking at from quite what can I say, sophisticated technology, young people who are local technology graduates. I think Suzanne refers to. We've got our local technical college, which can produce graduates in this field who have actually been involved in establishing it. And also technology which is accessible to the people who are running this at the moment, who are working class people who most of them don't have a matric, but they have some level of literacy. So the technology, if you think about the solar installation, they can monitor it through a cell phone app and know how much energy is being produced, what the value of that is, how the solar panels are producing and what the conditions are under which they are not producing enough electricity and so on. They can also do maintenance of that system. But the most important skill at this stage for us is not the growing of vegetables or the understanding of solar power. It's actually the management capacity. It's the financial management of the facility, and the fact that those residents own that facility, so they control and manage what is produced and how much is produced, and they know what the value of that is and how it is marketed and so on. So yeah, there's a range of skills which are involved. In terms of Rasigan's issue about the technology and the transformation of institutions. So I was thinking about this in terms of, okay, yesterday when Garth Strachan was talking about PV solar as a missed opportunity and how our industries hadn't been able to fill that gap in terms of the manufacture of PV solar. Okay, so what does that mean? Does it mean that we look, this kind of installation is obviously not going to manufacture that technology, the photovoltaic panels, but surely this is the kind of industrialization that should be supported by government in terms of an industrialization plan, that we can have our own solar capacity to produce photovoltaic panels. And I know this has been mooted in our local Kucha SEZ, but for some reason was not successful. The universities are playing a really important role in this in terms of the development of the technology. So what interests me is how appropriate that technology is that they're using. So PV solar, it's become, as you all know, much, much cheaper. Over the past 10 years, it's become accessible to us. And yet the university, okay, I can't say university, they're doing this, but I know like my university, Nelson Mandela University, they have a wonderful engineering department. They have excellent physics department, chemistry department. They do a lot of research into solar energy. And they've done things like build these solar-powered racing cars, which win competitions, you know, where they have competitions for students to design racing cars and so on. They also do some quite nice things like solar-powered vehicles for game drives, for tourism and so on, which are good, but how appropriate is it for what we need at the moment and for the kind of thing that we're looking at here? So, okay, so there's clearly room for universities to respond in that way, in a more appropriate way. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was the other very, very obvious change which we need is in finance systems, in banking systems, and that they have to be accessible, cell phone based, decentralized. We have examples which haven't really taken off, and we can give you one which is being piloted in the Eastern Cape, which is for us, which is a blockchain based banking, which is decentralized. But again, our institutional regulatory framework, if you like, for banking is completely discouraging that kind of decentralized initiative. So we're looking at something which is, you know, the power of the stokvels and the savings clubs and the funeral clubs and so on that people have in KwaZakhele. Almost every household in KwaZakhele is part of one of these schemes. And to harness that through something which people actually control, but which they can use as a means of exchange and using their cell phone can buy vegetables and electricity and so on. So it's quite possible. It's quite possible to do that, but we need the institutional framework to change to do that. And the technology, as you say, we need to support it to be more appropriate. My last point is, Sizeni, is this owned and run by male comrades? No, it's not. So the gap tap, it's called Sali Tubali. The two streets there, Sali and Tubali streets. So the co-op in that gap tap is called Saltuba, and the co-op is made up of households in that around that gap tap. It's voluntary, so households don't have to join the co-op, but I think about 24 out of the 30-something households have joined. And yeah, I think probably a sort of equal number of men and women who are members of that cooperative. It's just that the picture is showing the three guys who are the most active at the moment in terms of vegetable farming and managing this system. So, I think the thing is about vegetable gardening. A lot of women are involved with vegetable gardening, but vegetable gardens only work when the individuals are committed to them. You have to have people who really do vegetable gardening. And not everybody does vegetable gardening, and we don't have an expectation that every member of the co-op is going to have to do vegetable gardening, So it just happens that those are the guys who are active at the moment. And when the journalist took that picture yesterday. But don't worry, Sizeni, there are females also involved with running this cooperative on equal terms with the men. Pat, I don't know if you want to add something about the skills development issue or the technology issue, or respond to Rasigan's issue about periodization. The fact that in South Africa, we left behind in terms of the new technology.
Okay. So, yeah, I'll respond to both of those. In terms of the skills development, this kind of thing should be an ongoing process of organization building. And, these cooperatives should be taken through a 20-year program where they're constantly improving what they do. Sorry, my screen's just jumping around here. So in that sense, it's about training people how to manage a business. The renewable energy, how to make sure that it's pretty straight, keeping track of the technology. At a practical level, there's a process which people sort of need to go through. Form of organization. It's almost like it's a cross between a street community and a body corporate and some kind of social enterprise. Can people hear me?
Sorry, Patrick. I think your network seems quite unstable. So maybe try and close the video, and maybe it might seem much better when it's breaking up.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So, so thinking about the form of organization, it's mass-based. Any neighborhood should be able to do this kind of thing. It's almost like the cross between a street committee, a body corporate, and some kind of social enterprise. And the skills that are required to manage that or to participate in that, I mean, some people are not going to participate at all except as shareholders. They're going to receive a dividend, once every so often, whatever period people pay the dividend. Other people are going to be involved actually as working in the enterprise, and the and will get paid for that and will require the skills that are necessary for whatever it is that that particular thing is that they do. And that there's going to be potentially is a huge range of activities and skills that could be part of something like this kind of thing. So if we take over a brownfield production site and set up a processing plant to take plastic pellets and turn them into Jojo tanks, let's say, there's going to be a range of skills involved in that. And if you take it to the next level, there's no end to that process. And there should be an institutional framework of some kind that provides the necessary support to these emerging structures and entities. Just in terms of technology, firstly, that quantitative model that I showed there is actually an example of someone else's interpretation, not ours. It was just by way of illustration. And absolutely, the new cycle that we're supposedly entering now, we are behind several other societies, you could say, in terms of technology, things like robotics, although it's uneven. So there are aspects of robotics that we are doing at the university, for example, and there are also emerging open source technologies, including robotics and others, which are becoming available. And so in terms of that kind of thing, our thinking is, well, it doesn't matter if robots do production, so long as we own the robots, by we, we mean the community. It doesn't matter if we use technology to do something, so long as the ownership of that production process rests in the hands of people living in the area. Now, we're not saying completely replace other production formats and systems. What we're saying is it's possible to socialize elements of the production system, and we should start with what's in front of us. And then as we proceed, let's say a group of cooperatives wants to get into some kind of high-tech research and development for the motor industry. Plastics, the motor industry uses plastics all the time. If we were extruding our own plastic and we got to the point where we could be supplying the motor industry and set up become part of that supply chain, there's elements of the motor industry that are looking to localize. It's a separate question from whether we should have our own indigenous motor industry, and maybe we should. And maybe what needs to happen is that enterprises like this or organizations like this are on some kind of sort of technological journey where they are moving towards being able to do all kinds of things at a much more local level. And there is some theory around this, which is not just linked to the left, but in post-capitalist ideas. But the concept of a zero marginal cost society, where the cost of producing things becomes markedly cheaper because robots are involved and artificial intelligence involved, and so instead of us living in a society of scarcity, we're living in a society of abundance. And to some extent, that's what the Aristotle quote that I put up there earlier was about, and also Marx. There's interesting Soviet science fiction about this kind of thing, where what happens in a society where machinery produces most of the things we need? Well, the idea is that we look after the machines, and the machines then produce the things that we need. And are we moving in that direction? Unquestionably we are. And you can see it in things like, let's say, the music industry, where 20 years ago, to produce an album, you would have to go to a studio. You probably still have to do that, but you'd need a factory to produce the actual vinyl product. These days, once you've cut the track, the marginal cost of reproducing that is zero, or is close to zero. So anyone can download it more or less for free. and the music industry ran into a whole crisis around how to charge people for music and all that kind of thing, which is still dealing with. In theory, we are heading in the same direction with a lot of other products, where the marginal cost of production tends towards zero because of the application of things like robotics and artificial intelligence. And so then ownership of those robots becomes the key, because people's main income is not going to come from labor. It sounds far-fetched, but we're already seeing some industries where that's happening. And it's not far-fetched to think 20 years in the future as to where are the jobs going to be? Are there going to be jobs? For the UBI debate, if there aren't going to be jobs, then we need to talk about ownership. And that's kind of what we're saying. And ownership is a process that begins with what's around you. And you can then progress from there to, okay, what are we doing with that factory that's standing empty? Who's going to own that? And how is that going to function? Those are kind of the debates that we should be having. And our institutions, everything from universities to local government to trade unions, all of the civil society, all of those things should be deployed in assisting people to gain control over what potential production is in their local area. I'll stop there and let people over the comment.
Simbiso, can I answer a question by Songezo Mdoda? I can see it on the chat.
Yes, I was just thinking maybe of allowing Jenny to come with a question again because she was cut back, earlier. Yes, thanks. So Jenny, and then we will take the points by Songezo that Janet has already seen, and maybe we take two more comments or contributions as well. Jenny?
My apologies again. I think that the question that I would
Jenny, you appear you sound very far from the. It's not very audible.
Okay, let me try.
It is better.
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay. The question that I was trying to articulate was from that is profiled on the first slide through to the entire KwaZakhele community. How is the decision-making and control institutions designed in a way that ensures that at no stage can the project become corrupted by individuals who see opportunities for themselves rather than the collective cooperative processes? And how does one build into the project the kinds of mechanisms that will prevent the corruption being embedded in the project? So in a sense, it's picking up on the last slide, which talks about Soviet power and electrification. What are the political organizational mechanisms? I may have missed that in the presentation. As I said, I was in and out of the process. Thanks.
Shall I respond?
Yes, you can go ahead. Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, so just to say that last slide was only partially a joke. When Ronnie Casrell's actually visited this project a year or so ago, and he talked about it as the gap tap Soviet. And I mean, it's responding to Jenny's question by saying it's really simple. I mean, it's a collective. I mean, the model of the cooperative is that households can join, and only those households in that particular neighborhood can join. So there's no outsiders who can be members of that cooperative. Each household has equal status. They have to be resident there. So they can't be absentee landlords who own a property there, who control it. There's certain conditions. I mean, we spent a lot of time with the residents working through who could be a member of the cooperative. What are the conditions of membership? They actually democratically workshopped the constitution of the cooperative and agreed on its objectives, its shareholding system, and so on. And in the decision making, each household is represented by one person, and they have an equal vote. So yeah, it's the simple decision making process. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about mechanisms to prevent corruption, or not even corruption, but just opportunist manipulation or takeovers of small businesses and so on, cooperatives. These things happen all the time. And we've studied quite a lot of the cooperatives in Nelson Mandela Bay. And we think, I think there have been quite a lot of studies on why cooperatives fail in South Africa. And one of the reasons in Nelson Mandela Bay is because they were set up from the top as part of a municipal scheme on the basis of tenders. So, for example, in KwaZakhele, in the same area, there is a cleaning cooperative, and it was set up through a government process where municipality said our policy is to outsource cleaning of streets to cooperatives. And then they give a tender to the cooperative to provide that service for a particular area for a 2-year period or something like that. When the tender comes to an end, the cooperative dies. So the cooperative is entirely dependent on the municipality. And we worked, as you know, the university used to have a cooperative development unit, which worked with cooperatives to train them in how to do this. And that cooperative development unit was part of the municipal scheme. So the thing is, if the municipal scheme is not functioning, the cooperatives aren't functioning. We're trying to see if we can have a cooperative which functions as an independent and financially viable or economically viable entity. We haven't got there yet. I mean, it's not productive enough to be considered that as yet. But it's premised on those. Okay, so for those of you who don't know KwaZakhele, it's an old municipal township which was built in the 50s. And what happened at the early 90s and after 94 was that the houses were transferred into people's ownership. So they were rented municipal housing, like old townships like Alexandra and so on. And people then got the houses in their name. So they have a title deed to that house. They are property owners. So although it's a poor working class township, they own those resources. And so we're working on the premise that those house owners can use those houses and to use the public open space in between the houses to generate income. So they are already the owners of those productive resources. And the common land is commonage, so it's a publicly owned resource. There is something of a neighborhood tradition in KwaZakhele that the gap taps are controlled by the people who live there. And this is as a result of struggle, really, but it is accepted by the municipality that people can make decisions about how to use that land. So it's another thing we're testing. It's a bit of boundary pushing of who can use that land and how can it be used. And it may result in conflict. We don't expect it to be plain sailing, and there's been quite a lot of violence and corruption in KwaZakhele, actually, I've got to say, around a drain cleaning tender. Some of you who might have read Decentralization's book or Chippy Olver's books about Nelson Mandela Bay, I think 10 people died in the conflict around that drain cleaning tender. So, yeah, we have to be a little bit cautious and look at what business interests are in the area, who are our allies, and so on. But really, it relies on those residents controlling the project. If they don't control that co-op and see it as their own co-op, then it won't work. If it's the ward councillor who controls it, if it's the local business elite who control it, then it's not going to function, and it's going to be open to exactly the kind of, if not corruption, then systems of patronage, who benefits, who decides who benefits. I don't know how much I should go into this. I mean, it is a matter of great interest, but we had a case where we were brought, Pat, I think it was a year before last. We were summoned to the ward councillor's office, and there was a bunch of local businessmen there who said, basically, why didn't we get, like, we control employment in this area, and why didn't we get employed on this gap tap, or why didn't we decide who was going to be employed on the gap tap? And we had to account to them and explain, how the project was established and how the residents controlled it and so on. Yeah, so it's not easy. Okay, let me shut up. I don't want to say too much. You never know who might be.
Can I go through some of these Q&As just quickly?
Please.
Yes.
Okay, so Janet and Patrick, there was a question a while ago from Philip Ganyago saying this is quite excellent. The viability based on potential take-up or participation in this as presented is compelling, but based perhaps on similar projects elsewhere or in KwaZakhele, what has been the general percentage take-up? Because that may influence success. Okay, then I think, Janet, you had seen the question from Songezo earlier, so maybe just to go back to it, can you elaborate on what does this changing, in inverted commas, legislative framework, what can it be interpreted to mean for the future socialization of production in relation to energy or electricity? Then Sizeni has asked another question. There was an indication of the amount needed or projected for the project. I think those different amounts for the different sub-projects. Can we get an indication as to where the said amount is expected to come from and whether there will be conditions set on this? And then Alison Moultrie, just please remind us again, what is a gap tap and who named the gap taps? I think that's it.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Okay, so let me start and then Patrick can come in. So just to start at the end, the gap tap, it's a space between the houses where when they built these municipal houses, they didn't have water going to each household. So they had a communal stand tap where people collected water, and that communal stand tap is on a piece of open ground, and the residents called it a gap tap. So the term gap tap comes from the residents of KwaZakhele or from other townships. I don't even know where it originated. But everybody in KwaZakhele says, this is my gap tap, or I'm going to go and meet so-and-so on the gap tap, or we're going to do this with the gap tap. So it's commonly understood by residents there. Philip's question about the take-up of this in KwaZakhele or elsewhere. So KwaZakhele, it's at the moment it's only limited to the one gap tap, which is one cooperative of 24 households. We think it has potential to be taken up extensively, but we have to prove the model first before we'll get buy-in to extend it. I'm just saying that I am familiar with, I think it's in the Netherlands, where there are similar community or neighborhood PV solar schemes where people produce energy and then sell it to the municipality. And then the institutional question that Songezo asked, how does the legislative framework change to allow municipalities to buy energy and so on? So Nelson Mandela Bay has two things at the moment. On the one hand, it has a feed-in tariff, and you, like me, I live in a middle-class house. I can put solar panels on my roof, and I can feed into the grid, into the municipal grid, and that gets deducted from my municipal bill. Okay, but I can't get paid for that by the municipality. So if I produce a surplus, the municipality won't give me cash, it won't give me money. But as a middle class person, I can actually benefit from this. It's great. The second thing is that companies which register and as power producers can sell electricity, but this is where we are looking at why it's not possible for ordinary people to do this. So it's like it's trying to adapt the existing municipal regulations to allow for residents to sell electricity. I don't think it's going to be too difficult to do that. And the municipality is actually been working with us on this. I mean, they're sympathetic to the idea, together with GIZ, which is the German development agency, which is working with the municipality in provision of PV solar. So what they've been doing up until now is providing PV solar to the unelectrified households, like informal settlements and shacks and so on. But in fact, they are working with us on the technology here. Okay, I'm finished. Patrick, I don't know if you want to respond to some of the questions. Can you hear me?
Are you asking Patrick or everyone?
I'm happy to take a few more questions rather than responding. I think you've responded to quite a few, so we take a few more.
Okay, comrades, please raise hands. Maybe let me just come here with just two things that I was just thinking about. The first one, obviously, on the the issue of co-ops have quite an interesting take. And I remember that, if you remember, during the time of Minister Square, the Department of Social Development, but also, I mean, generally the government took up this cooperative mantra, and it was implemented across, unfortunately, with astounding levels of collapse, and in the ones that looked like they might work, as soon as the money came from government, then the aeroplane, the co-op aeroplane, dived all the way to the floor. And there were a number of cases. I remember that we were doing some work on social co-ops, what they call social co-ops, that were around Mount Elif, Tujini area, in which they were having these women who were recipients of either child support or old age pension grants, and they were working with them around agricultural cooperatives. And so one aspect of it is the general failure. I mean, you already mentioned it earlier around the top-down approach, but also the inorganic approach around co-ops, in which people they just find people and then they just put them together, and then they tell them, go do something, we'll give you the money, or whatever ways in which, and then how all of this collapse. But two, related to that, what is going to be interesting maybe is to get a much more bigger picture around what brought possibilities for collective mobilization, for instance, in this cooperative that is working in KwaZakhele. I mean, one of the challenges, obviously, in South Africa is post-94. In fact, it's not even a post-94 one. It's essentially a post-90 phenomena around massive demobilization in the communities, and so in which organic bottom-up forms of mobilization essentially were done away with, and many of them at that time were replaced by other than branches of the organization, which then changed the nature around which people, communities actually engaged with each other. And essentially, in many of these communities, one of the only things that seem to maintain some kind of community mobilization only happens to be the church. And now in some provinces like KZN, there is the return of these traditional and cultural formations. And so it might be quite useful to really have a much more thorough discussion around how then do we enter the discussion around what's the role of this massive, very intentional demobilization, and then because if these are to be bottom up or ground up initiatives, how then do we return to those kinds of community mobilizations that enable people to really have active mobilization within their own communities? So I think those, yeah. If you can just be able to articulate those very two issues.
There's also a question by Babsi.
Yes, please come through, Babsi. Comrade Babsi, please unmute.
Hello, comrades. And thanks for the presentation, the two comrades. Just zooming onto the problem of the cooperatives failure, I think that's a very interesting topic, because for all the theories, the somewhat rich theories that we have, and the failure to put them into practical implementation, one of the very clear examples is the failure of co-ops. And we are ridiculed at every interval that if we can't succeed on those particular low levels in trying to implement forms of socialism through cooperatives, what exactly can the other forms of socialism be of any success? So I understand the questions around the setting up. I mean, when you look at the failures, setting up from the top instead of the bottom, the dependency syndrome vis-a-vis the independence and the economically viable, establishing of economically viable or financially viable entities. But I just want us to zoom onto the other two, which I have found that in most instances, because of the little manufacturing orientation in the state, but also in our ruling party, sometimes that particular orientation also kinds of drills down to the co-ops, that you find many of the co-ops are much more service and less manufacturing. And I think we need to talk about that, because what the examples that KwaZakhele we've spoken about, food production is manufacturing, and it talks of self-reliance. Electricity manufacturing is production, but we're seeing less of the co-ops of production. So that's the one thing. But the second other factor is a factor of the inflexible funding models, or what I can call the improper government analysis of any cooperative ideas, and therefore the subsequent support. That most government departments are sometimes not geared up to really have the technical know-how as to how to analyze the co-ops and how to further support them. So I want us to kind of zoom into those particular two. But I think the one of the things that I heard I'm not sure who was it from, but from one of the two participants, which was, presenters, which was a bit troubling for me, was the notion of non-participation, but dividend recipients in cooperatives. Aren't we promoting some form of capitalism through those particular exercises? What do we mean by that? When there is non-participation, but people stand and wait for dividends at some particular point. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Comrade Babsi. Any other question? There is here some questions from Alison Moultrie, and one, it says, how are you assessing the success of the co-op? Is the co-op successful according to these criteria? She also says or asks, obviously this is a research project which has been capitalized in very specific ways, intellectually and financially. Do you see possibilities of other communities or co-ops elsewhere to replicate aspects of your design? If so, which aspects, and how can others access your learnings and designs to date? Maybe just also, because I see here there is over Comrade Jenny, Reneva, and Alex, which I suspect that they might be familiar with this issue. Last year, it's a pity that Duma is not here. We went with Duma to China, and I think it was in one of the towns in Hunan province, in which they showed us this community-driven and owned energy project that allows essentially communities, then they actually generate, so the energy that is generated, they are also using the same concept of being able to sell it to the grid, and so that then generates income for the community. And there is other related projects that they are doing to it, and so that's probably one of the examples around something similar that maybe we might add into this kind of discussion that we're having here.
Can I ask Patrick to respond? I mean, there were a couple of questions about funding. So the one was about how is the project capitalized? The other one is what is the amount that is needed to set up an installation like this? The other one is what is the funding model for the co-op? And I mean, I think Babsi's reflection on the problem of the existing funding model for co-ops. But I think, Patrick, could you respond to that on the issue of I think your idea about how sort of COVID recovery funding could be used to stimulate this kind of productive activity and what would be required.
Okay. All right, so the idea, before I get to the funding issue, let me just talk about this idea that people would be passive shareholders and just receive a dividend. The thinking behind that is that your ownership of this productive asset that belongs to the community is because you live in the community, because you live in the area. So if you went to a different area, you would join a different co-op and also get a return on what they, by virtue of living in a house in a particular neighborhood, you get the right to ownership of the renewable energy that gets produced by the sun that shines on that neighborhood, is the kind of principle behind it. And yes, to some extent, that means that you are becoming a capitalist because there is going to be labor involved in that enterprise. Somebody's going to get paid for that labor. We're not yet in a socialist society, so we can't avoid, if we're going to be involved in enterprise of some degree, even if it's a cooperative, you're still going to have to behave like a capitalist under certain circumstances. You know, completely worker-controlled cooperative, it's slightly different, but this is not a worker cooperative. This is a neighborhood cooperative, and it's about managing the assets of the neighborhood, which is land, access to sunshine, if there's public open space, it's wherever the households can produce themselves. And obviously, the surplus that's distributed is not going to be, the idea is not to exploit people, it's to pay a reasonable price for whatever it is that the cooperative is the cooperatives will engage in its interaction with the surrounding world in a progressive way. The other thing I want to say about that is that the actual form of the organization is far less important than the substance of it, and that is that it must be. The idea is that it's extreme democracy, and there are examples of this where that elsewhere in the world, to various degrees and scales. One is, for example, the Mondragon cooperative in Spain, which, for example, elects its board of directors by the workers. So you can't become managing director of Mondragon unless you win the election of all the workers in the company. It's an example of extreme democracy. And we believe that a similar thing should happen in this kind of situation. The neighborhood should have a right to decide what happens with the collective assets that are owned, that are existent in that neighborhood. And ownership is not the key issue here. Access is more important than ownership to some degree. So you don't have to own the land. You've got to have access to the land so the cooperative can actually produce something on the land, whether it's energy or food. Just to get to, so on that issue, you know, we don't have a hard and fast idea of where this will eventually end up. What we're saying is place the production in the hands of the neighborhood and let them decide what they're going to do after that. It's extreme democracy. And they must come back to us if they need help. You know, they must have a reliable partner in the institutional world that they trust, that is not going to rip them off, that can guide them through the kinds of things that people are talking about in terms of, you know, whether everything from corruption to skills development. The local state should be trusted and not corrupt. So obviously we need to change the local state. And, I mean, Janet was referring to 10 assassinations. It was actually 21 assassinations. We lost count with the number of people that died for Barani's, municipal waste tender. And you know, there's practically warfare out there. The kind of thing the apartheid government did it, we would have said, well, this is clearly counter-revolutionary activity when they did it. So, you know, getting back from that, the point we're trying to make here is that the people must decide what they want to do with the assets that belong to them. And we must assist them to get the most they can possibly out of those assets. Whether it's a piece of open ground, or the roof on the top of their house, or their back garden, or a brownfield industrial site that's being taken over in some form. The exact organizational form is something that will evolve over time and doesn't have to be a cooperative. It could be some kind of other structure. But the institutional arrangements at the moment mitigate against any of this kind of activity. So to get a bank account for this cooperative was still haven't achieved it. We had to jump through lots of hoops. To get a bank account for the development agency that we set up took over a year. Eventually the university had to go to Nedbank and say, listen, give these guys a bank account. Every single institution that is supposed to support local economic development or SMME development or anything of that nature fails dismally, whether it's the city council or and I'm not talking about individuals in these organizations, we're talking about the institutional environment mitigates against anybody organizing themselves along these lines. So that's something we need to look at. In terms of the development finance, where the finance would come from, it probably should be a mixture of some kind of grant to set this thing up, and then potential to expand the production using other means of finance. So you can do what capitalists do, go to the market and borrow maybe at a lower rate to finance equipment which is paid off over time. That can still make sense. You know, these solar panels, the payback period is less than 5 years. I think it's something like 3.5 years. So after 3.5 years, the whole thing is completely paid back, and then it's giving you money for the next 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is, and beyond, guaranteed for 25 years, with minimal amounts of maintenance, so that the local owners that live there, with solar panels, once it's up there, most of what you have to do is just make sure that the kids don't throw stones at it. It's kind of what our pilot has shown. Very minimal maintenance. You know, obviously will need to be checked once in a while by someone who's qualified for that kind of thing. And you can build an ecosystem around that once you've got 100 of these or more up in a township. So just to get back to the development finance question, it depends. So there should be some of it that's funded by grant money, especially in places where there's almost no resource. But there's no reason why, you know, we can't interact with the development finance sector for various different kinds of things. Especially if you're thinking, you know, something like taking the Swartkops power station and redeveloping it. And obviously you've got to be careful, you know, because you don't want to be in a situation where the banks end up controlling it. But there are examples in other countries where this kind of thing has been done and done successfully. We did case studies in the United States where there's a organization called the Evergreen Cooperative, which was made up of old steel workers and did a very similar thing, they did everything from solar panels to food production as well. And they repurposed factories to make lettuce, for example. They've got a whole indoor farming thing going on. And they produce more lettuce than any other producer in the Northeast United States. That kind of thing can happen here. It's a question of political will and deploying institutions and necessary partners from civil society and even from industry to make it happen. It's not a one kind of direction solution. It's about mobilizing the resources of the nation to do the things that we need to do to make our neighborhoods a better place to live. A way of putting it. I don't know if that.
Great. Can I respond quickly to the question about mobilization, which I think is quite an important issue, just to
Yes.
To finish off. So just to say, you know, I've been working and studying in KwaZakhele for quite a long time, and it was really one of the sites of the highest levels of popular mobilization in the 80s. And it's got a very rich history of resistance and comrades from the 1950s and so on. Anyway, it built a very, very tight network of street and area committees and localized decision-making around campaigns like consumer boycotts and so on. Highly, highly mobilized community. So our question was, how is that taken into this democracy? I.e., what do people control? What aspects of their lives do they really control? And as you say, I mean, there's been a demobilization. But when I thought about this, I realized that, well, I didn't realize, I actually asked people, hundreds and hundreds of people in KwaZakhele, what did you take decisions about in your street committee? What do you take decisions about? And what I realized was that there was no instances of people having what we call prefigurative economic decision-making. So they actually controlled crime in KwaZakhele, not now, but in the 80s. People now, if you ask them, and I've actually done research on this, they say, you know, it was safer in the 80s when we were under this highly repressive apartheid regime, which could kill us. We actually controlled our own environment and we prevented assault, robbery, rape, neighborhood theft, etc. Okay, so we won't go into that, but people had some levels of social control, but they didn't have economic institutions. So they didn't set up economic institutions around food production or even things like food cooperatives. You know, it's quite easy to run a vegetable cooperative and go and buy vegetables in bulk and distribute them to members of the co-op. I mean, we used to do this as students, but we haven't seen that kind of economic mobilization. So my answer to this is that the co-op that we're setting up, or that was set up, in fact, as a result of this project, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. When people benefit economically from their own business or their own co-op, their own institution, then it will work. I mean, it will work because it gives them benefit. It's pure materialist argument. And it doesn't require any kind of ideological mobilization or education or anything. Simply, if people benefit materially from it, it will be replicated. People will want to do it because they can see the benefit of it. Anyway, we live in hope, you know. We're going to see if that happens. Okay, I think I've said enough.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else.
There was just, I saw Alex once had raised a hand. Do you still want to raise an issue, Alex?
Just on the, thank you. Just on the point
I can't
you have
hear.
raised. Can you hear?
I can't hear you.
Oh, I have unmuted myself here, but I think maybe it is the earphones. So let me unplug them. And my apologies for that. Sorry. I hope you will hear me now.
Yeah, that's better. That's great.
Okay. No, Stembiso raised an issue about China earlier on. See, what's going on in China is different from what is going on in South Africa. There are many things in South Africa that will not be possible under the current legislative and regulatory regime. And that includes the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act. So China has a different legislative framework that allows what Sitembiso mentioned to flourish, even in the productive sectors that are supported to a point where they even export. Because there are so many goods we receive from there which are not manufactured by your typical PTY LTDs, but are manufactured in communities organized in the form of co-ops and so on, as well worker-owned co-ops and community co-ops. In our case here, at all levels, our state is embedded in private sector control of production and supplies to the state. So a household like yours, Jeanette, or mine, or that of the working class elements like myself on the grounds, does not feature in the criteria set, for example, in the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, or in the practical implementation of those two laws. So the system says go and look for private sector suppliers of the following and take the cheapest. That is at the simplistic level, although it is more complex than that. So I think the point you have made regarding what is going on in the Nelson Mandela municipality puts forward a challenge to us here and to the working class to pursue a program of system change. If we achieve, even if it is not a fundamental change, like Patrick has correctly said, even if it is not a fundamental change, but it is a gradual or incremental system change that enables communities, and those can be working class communities and so on, to be rewarded in the way that private control of production is rewarded, then we will be able to advance. I quite agree with the points raised by Patrick that we are still in a capitalist society, and somewhere, somehow, this or that practice can be capitalistic even in a co-op. So clearly, a revolution does not occur in a day. It takes a long time, but it is deep going. So step by step, it makes use of the old to build the new. So it is not a complete sudden rupture that occurs, or, if I may emphasize, at one stroke. But the examples you have given, Jeanette and Patrick, also are quite important. And clearly, we do need to push for system changes. And in that way, we can benefit the working class. Babsi raised, I think it was Babsi who raised the failure of co-ops. I mean, studies have been conducted, but I think we do need to do more than we have done, because the collapse and failures of co-ops in South Africa, in a very big way, could be linked to the legislative and regulatory atmosphere that applies to co-op. It is very easy for Stembiso and I to go and get registered, establish a PTY Ltd, than we can follow a procedure to establish a co-op. So there are those things. So we have a capitalist state that is deeper than, many of the capitalist states that are able to do projects that advance the working class. So the sooner we realize that, the better. I must say, I wish to thank you very much. And I hope that Comrade Jenny, together with Stembiso, will continue with this, because what this session has done, it has, build an exposition of the practical efforts on the ground. So you are not dealing with these matters only in the sphere or the realm of theory. You are also looking at practical efforts on the grounds to move forward, the difficulties, the challenges, and you put forward proposal on how we can overcome that. I quite like to thank you both for doing that. That is what we need in order to move forward. Yeah, my sincere gratitude for your work, and your availability also. It has been long coming. Yeah, thanks.
Indeed. Just probably, let's say, last words from Jenny and Patrick. Janet and Patrick, but I think indeed this was a very important session, and hopefully we can be able to have other sessions that are of this manner, that really look at the actual concrete work of what are these alternatives that we are espousing for, that we are theorizing about, and so I think we are all will be very much interested to really follow the progress of this, and really to see what emanates from this work, but also what other maybe possible comparative kinds of pilots can also be done, and what kind of cross-pollination can be done in this exploration of really concrete programs and really concrete struggles. One of the things that has consistently come from these webinars that we have had actually has been this issue of the significance of articulating these sessions with concrete struggles, with actual concrete conditions that are happening that are really happening there on the ground. And so this is quite very useful indeed. So any last words before we close?
Yeah, so, okay, so let me just say, I would ask people also to look at the Climate Justice Charter, which was launched a couple of weeks ago, and look at some of the demands of that Climate Justice Charter, which relate quite closely to what we are arguing. So they're coming from, you know, from civil society, from outside of government, but I just think this kind of group should look quite carefully at the Climate Justice Charter and see how it can be realized. And I'm thinking, thank you, Alex, Comrade Alex, I like your input there. So are we talking now about socialism by stealth? So we just don't do it. We bring it in slowly. Nobody will see until it's there. But not to laugh. So my slogan now is eco-socialism is the future. Build it now. We just like building on your old slogan.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity.
Anything, Patrick? Last words?
Yeah, just to say that for me, this is about you know, the great strength of our revolution was the building of street committees. It's one of the things that got us through the last 20 or 30 years. And you know, we should be building on that strength. And the task of the National Democratic Revolution should be to show the rest of the world how to live. And we've got that potential in front of us. You know, when it comes to, I really believe you can trust the people. And we should trust them to, by backing them, to look after the assets in their neighborhood and look after their neighborhoods and make their neighborhoods places that are fit for South Africans to live in, is what I think we should be doing. And then one last kind of thing about this is that we really need to make it possible for everybody to be involved in this. So if there are capitalists who want to assist us, let's make it easy for them. And the same thing applies to people who are historically advantaged by the apartheid system, particularly the white working class, which is kind of left out in a lot of our discussions. And there are lots of people there are willing to be mobilized if only we were to be able to get to do that. So yeah, so our tradition is the street committees, and we should be showing the world how to live. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, comrades, for this very fruitful discussion. And we've already passed our cutoff time almost by 7 minutes. And again, we really would like to thank Comrade Janet and Comrade Patrick for this discussion. And we have already seen email addresses that have been registered on the chat, and so we will do the best to forward the presentation to the people that attended this session, and we're gonna be continuing, comrades, with these webinars a week after next, and so we are really trusting that we are building momentum to really provide progressive alternatives and really to mount this increasing pressure that we really need to mount quite increasingly sometimes to deaf ears. Sometimes it sounds like, but we still need to mount it, and hopefully, if we can build momentum for of struggles from our people, there will be a miracle. The deaf ears will miraculously be opened to actually hear and respond. On these things. So thank you very much, comrades, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, comrades. Thank you. Comrade Jenny, we do need this